Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I was talking with someone the other day, and their comment was, I can't really engage in this inquiry because my thoughts are just constantly going. So I think I can't really engage in this inquiry because as soon as I try, this thinking just calls me away all the time. So I'm just wrapped up in this constant cycle of thinking. And this doesn't allow any space. So what I want to know is, how can I stop thinking? Tell me some way in which I can stop thinking. Then I can do the inquiry. Some of you might be familiar with this state of mind. In the way of inquiry, however, it's not necessary to stop thinking. To tell yourself, I have to stop thinking before I can do the inquiry, is really to engage in the activity of the mind. The mind wants you to be deflected away from your own silence, away from your own peace. Why? This sense of me-ness, this mind, this mental activity of the mind, enjoys being the one that's in control. This sense of ego, or thinking mind, which is what ego is, has become so identified with that it's really hard to imagine oneself without any thoughts. But then we come to something like advaita, and advaita says, you are not your thoughts. Well, this causes the ego mind to panic, because it is what feels it has preeminence. So even if we move past the idea that I am the body, a lot of people can get past the idea that they are the body, but they can't get past the idea that they are the mind, or this ego mind, this ego sense. I am me. And this is not to say that ego or mind or thinking is wrong. You may have noticed by now in your practice, in your sadhana, in coming to your own silence, that thinking arises quite spontaneously. So in the waking state, as well as in the dream state, you can notice that thinking, and thoughts actually arise all together. This is true of all of the senses. So taster, tasting, and taste come together. Seer, seeing, sight, the object of sight, all come together. You cannot separate them out. You can look at them very precisely and you can say, okay, this is the thinker, this is the thinking, and this is the thought. That can be seen, that there are these parts of it, but they don't come one without the other two. And this is true of all the senses. They come all of a piece, and they come quite spontaneously. This being the case, if you simply say, I want to stop thinking so that I can do the inquiry, you'll have to enter into some form of suppression or neglect. And this, of course, will come back later on to once again to disturb your inquiry or your presence. Of course, in all the traditions, there are methods by which you can temporarily suspend thinking. So in the Buddhist tradition, as an example, you can follow the breath. So you increase your concentration on the breath. You follow the breath, the beginning, the middle, the end. You narrow your focus, concentration comes in, and temporarily thinking is suspended as long as that concentration is there. Similarly, in yoga, there are breathing exercises, pranayams you can do, such as square breathing, alternate nostril breathing, types of breathing that you can do that center the mind, bring you to a point of one-pointed concentration, and in that moment the mind stops. You can do japa, you can do mantra. All of these techniques will temporarily suspend thinking. And so once thinking is suspended, it becomes possible, if you remember, to ask the question, who am I? What am I? Am I aware here? It becomes possible in that momentary suspension of thinking. But what you'll notice right away is that very quickly the thinking starts to come back. Whatever the conditioned tapes are, whatever the habit of the mind is, what it most often dwells on, that will come back. So then you'll be required to either pick up the breath or the japa or the mantra or something again in order to quiet the mind, keep it under some sort of sense of control, and then you can start again. So this is not the focus in Advaita. In Advaita, we're not told pick up another object, pick up another way of being. And there's a reason for this, just so that you understand it. As long as you are following the breath, counting the breath, doing japa, doing mantra, all of these things which suspend the mind, as long as you are doing that, you will be able to keep the mind still, but you will not be able to stop the thinking. This is the direct recognition that there is some belief going on that you may not be the body, but you are the mind. That you have given it attention, you have conditioned it so that when something enters the mind, you immediately have to pay attention to it. You immediately have to give it its food, which is the attention of mind. And then this will continue this cycle of not being able to adequately or effectively engage in the inquiry. Not being able to ask this question, who am I? Or to suspend all this thinking for very long. You can ask the question, who am I? But the question, who am I, you already know, you've been instructed, is there in order for you to fall into the empty space which comes after the question, not to answer the question. We're not here to continue this belief that there actually is an I. The purpose of inquiry is to undermine the belief that there is an I. We can't do this using other techniques because other techniques require that I, or a sense of me-ness, be here as subject in order to watch the breath as an object, in order to chant the mantra as an object. So the subject-object relationship has to be here all the time in order to continue any kind of practice related to breath or mantra or something like that. There has to be a me to engage in that practice. This is also true of a lot of meditations. So if you're doing visualization kind of meditations, there has to be a me here in order to visualize. But our focus in Advaita is to undercut that me. And in fact, to begin to talk right from the beginning about the fact that there is no me. So, you're not encouraged in Advaita practice or Advaita sadhana to pick up this me in order to eliminate some object, in this case thinking. What's recommended instead is that you recognize that there is no thinker. So Bhagavan's question was suggested to be, to whom does this thought come? One of the things that can be applied is this question applied to almost anything. Who is the thinker? I am. Who am I? Who is the meditator? I am. Who am I? Who is the seer? I am. Who am I? The efficacy, the benefit of this type of practice, if you will, or sadhana, is that you can see that there is no reason to look into the objects. Now, to apply this to this person's question, this means there's no reason to look into the thinking. Is this correct? There's no interest in the thinking in this way of sadhana. The only interest there is in what supports the idea, and this is only an idea, that there is a thinker. So the question, who am I, or who is thinking this thought, me, then who is this me, who am I? The reason we do this is so that we can develop this consistent habit, which ultimately becomes a natural habit. It's not something we think about. It's not something we have to force every time we have a thought. It's just something that happens naturally. We are withdrawing the attention from the objects themselves, which are there through conditioning, which are there as a natural part of having a body and a mind. And we are withdrawing that attention and turning it back toward the source. And in the case of a sadhak, the source is toward the I. So we say, who is this thinker? Who is this meditator? Who is eating this food? Who is walking? Who is talking? Who is smelling? Who is tasting? Who is touching? I am. You see, we cannot avoid that. As soon as we say, who am I? As soon as we say, who is this taster? Who is the meditator? Who is the smeller? We immediately withdraw the attention from whatever the object was and turn it back into this felt sense of I am the body. And in this case, we can use that. The teaching says, you are not the body. But for a moment, we can say, this is the one who is the smeller. This is the one who is the thinker. This is the one who is the taster. This is the meditator. And that is associated with this felt sense, I exist, or this me is this body-mind. But we're only using that temporarily. We're using it to bring the attention back, to anchor it in the body, in the here, in the now, in the present moment, and then to fall through it, or go beyond it, or transcend it, or however you want to say that. To once again open the space of mind from object to space itself. Because ultimately, if we keep asking the question, to whom does this thought come? We are undermining the idea that we are the thinker. And this helps to undermine this strong identification with the mind. So it's not necessary in our sadhana for us to get rid of the mind, to suppress it, to try to force it in some way to stop. If it's making us crazy and we simply can't stop, then we can definitely do alternate nostril breathing, or chant the name, or do some form of japa or mantra, and it will momentarily bring us back. It will calm the mind. We do it for as long as we need to, a few seconds, a few minutes, half an hour. And it will definitely calm the mind if the mind is really troubling us at some moment. But we can also recognize through this understanding, I am not the mind, that comes from asking the question, who is the thinker? I am. Who am I? Through this process, we're able to see that the thinker has no real validity. The thinker is just a passing set of concepts. Which have been identified with, but they don't actually exist. If we know that the thinker doesn't exist, the thinking just becomes something that happens occasionally automatically. The thoughts themselves have no real value. If you want to know who you are, you can't think your way to that. So this requires in some way that you be able to set the thinking aside, but not through suppression. The thinking is there. It happens quite naturally. So ask yourself the question, to whom does this thought come? The answer will come quite naturally, not maybe in the mind, just by this felt sense of presence. It comes to me. Okay, then who am I? You're back in the inquiry itself. And in the beginning, this can be a little bit challenging because you have to find some way to remind yourself to ask the question. If you are really troubled by thinking, really troubled by a continuous kind of loop mind, it can be very challenging to remember to ask yourself, who is thinking? But do it as often as possible. Find a way to remind yourself, to ask yourself, to whom does this thought come? So that you can go back to this source of recognition. That the thinking, while it is arising spontaneously, is not who you are. And you can then ask the question, who am I? What is aware here? And take yourself out of this thinking loop without using suppression or manipulation. When this becomes quite natural to you, then you'll find that the mind enjoys this peace and quiet so much that it quite rapidly begins to develop the habit to go back into this calmness, into this peace, into this recognition that it is not the thinking, that the thinking is not really significant or important. You know, if you need to get online and book your airline ticket, you need to think about that. The question isn't about having a mind which serves a function. This mind is useful. It's about what's happening in between the functioned usefulness of the mind. Most of us can get online and book an airfare, book an air ticket. But then once we close the computer and it's done, something else takes over. We've picked up you've seen this at night, most likely. You turn your computer on at 10 o'clock at night and you want to look at one video, or you just want to relax for a few minutes with something by looking on Facebook or TikTok or something like that. And then suddenly it's 1 o'clock in the morning because the mind has been kicked into gear and it just gets on this constant loop. Or something in the video you watched and then turned off excited something in the mind. And then for 2 hours you cannot go to sleep because you're thinking about what it was you saw, or what it triggered something in you that's going on in your life. And so there you are for another 2 hours. You can't go to sleep because your mind has been triggered. And so what we want to do here is always keep reminding ourselves that we are not this mind. This is the way to be liberated from the mind, to come into this here now, into this present moment, and allow yourself to be here as being consciousness and bliss, which is your true nature. Okay. And also remind yourself that when you are thinking and you catch yourself and you say, oh, I was thinking again. One of the things that my friend was doing was saying to herself, because I was thinking, I was not doing something correct. I was not getting it right. I was failing in some way. No, thinking is thinking. It has a spontaneous arising quality, doesn't it? Are any of you in control of your thoughts? Can you control when they come? No, they just arise as a consequence of the circumstances, right? Body, mind, world. All three are connected intimately all the time. So it's not about doing something right or wrong. It's about recognizing what is. This is the nature of body-mind existence. The nature of existence is that all of these things are interdependent or codependent. They arise spontaneously, simultaneously. They still are not you. This is what we're trying to get at here. To question this idea that whatever you are seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, thinking, experiencing, that this is you, and it defines you and limits you. You are unborn, undying being, consciousness. Everything else is passing through, impermanent and temporary, up to and including this body. So our question here is, what is real? What is permanent? I remember sitting like that a lot.
Yeah.
There's some comfort in holding that arm.
It is.
Yeah.
There's some healing energy. It's just like
Yeah.
comfort.
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Do you need something to go under it to help hold it up?
No, actually, the thing is that the higher it goes, the more it stretches, and the stitches have been removed, like the clamps. Now it seems it's better, to keep it further away somehow, because else the stretch on the scar
Nice.
doesn't feel right.
Good. It's healing quickly. Good.
When did you guys come on? Like some weeks ago, or maybe some months ago? No?
Oh, a long time
A
ago.
long time ago.
Yeah. 2 weeks after the accident.
It caused a lot of attention, speaking of the bodily thing like that.
Yes, but also, but also,
It takes a lot of space on the screen.
it takes a lot of space on the screen, but also it provides an opportunity for one to realize that there is something which is unmoving, even in the face of this, right? The pain is coming and going, all of the sensations that are associated with it.
In the cities, it's evident.
The what?
That there's something else taking over what you're talking about. But as soon as one gets up and engages, it's again same old story. Then it's again the identification is there. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, but come to this place where you begin to understand that the identification is actually an extension of some form of thinking.
Even while engaging.
Yes, and it's a conditioned response to something, right? And then you can actually come to rest and realize that you are also not that. You see, this is why Bhagavan used to also say to people, yes, that's fine, that's good, but you are not that. And he would suggest to people that they take up this practice of neti, so that you use this, not this, not this, not this, as a way of kind of sliding aside the tendency toward identification. You still are in the moment. You're still acknowledging that this something has risen in the space on the screen of awareness. Something has risen. But there's also a simultaneous recognition that you are not that. Whatever it is, you are not that.
Yeah.
And this is these are preliminary practices, and the reason that they're preliminary practices is because once they become second nature to us, we don't need to do them anymore. We simply go through life realizing that we are not what we are seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, experiencing, thinking, emoting. These things are happening. We're not saying they are not happening. We're not saying that they are not being experienced.
It wants to appear as real.
It wants to appear as real. This is the understanding. Yeah, it wants to appear as real.
Yeah. But then, speaking of real and unreal, I mean, for the sage, for the realized one, everything is real, because if it becomes unreal when it's seen separated from the self. Maybe I'm going on a limb here, but
no,
let's
go
see.
ahead.
Let's follow this thought through.
Yeah.
But just
yeah.
Because Shankaracharya says the world is Brahman is real.
Yes.
The world is unreal.
Yes.
So far, so good. We can live with that. Great.
Yes.
But then the third one is the real mind bender.
Yes.
Which he says Brahman is the world.
Brahman is the world.
So
yes.
There you go.
Yes.
He can only say that if everything is seen as the self, which means undivided.
Yes.
So therefore, for a sage, everything must appear as real. It's just the illusory view that is, it's not an illusion, it's the illusory view of the world. Do you get my...
Yes.
So, would you comment on that?
It's even more insidious than an illusory view that the world is real. It's the actual identification with the world, which is being experienced conceptually, not as the self. The self is devoid of the personal, devoid of this ego mind. What's happening before that recognition is that the mind has taken control of what appears as my life and is living it as a set of concepts, not as what is here in this moment. Free, open, without conceptualization. So when we talk about the sage viewing everything as real and then realizing that everything is Brahman, what we're really saying is that the recognition is that none of this is related to a me, which is illusory. We're not saying that the experiences themselves or the hardness of this chair is not real. We're simply saying, can you understand that to say this is a chair or a sofa is to address this conceptually? Huh?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
This is right. We cannot really say that we know what this is, but for the sake of simplicity and out of habit, we say this is a sofa.
Yeah.
And then guess what happens? We no longer need to consider beyond that. Right?
Yeah.
Mind says, I know what that is. It shuts off to any other experience.
And that mind takes a heroic dose of psilocybin, and then all that's gone.
Or asks the question, who am I?
Yes.
Is this true? The sage knows that the sage is somehow sitting here in space, but has no need to say this is a sofa, or even a need to say this is a body. The sage knows this is the real.
Yes.
This is Brahman.
Nice.
This is Brahman. 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 There's no need to say man, woman, old, young. There's no need for any of it. We do this all the time, which means that we live conceptually. We determine our experience by relating positively or negatively to however we conceive of life to be. So we live out of a life of conceptual illusion,
Yes.
thinking we know what things are because we can name them.
That's it.
But this is just not true. And this is what release from this kind of conditioning shows us, is that everything which is here is all of a piece. It's all the same thing. In Vedanta, we say Brahman. In some other space, we might say emptiness. In some other space, we might say God. All of this is that. This is what we know at the moment of recognition. And this, out of this comes the recognition, I am that. But even this is to use the concept, I. There is no I. And the concept, that. There is no that. So at this moment, when this recognition comes, there is nothing but silence. There cannot be anything but silence. To move beyond silence is to move into conceptual thinking of some sort, even to say I. So this is why it's said that at this moment of recognition, the sage is simply quiet. There's nothing else. There's only silence. And this silence can't be described. So again, silence is a concept. So I encourage you always to be moving beyond your own concepts. Recognize. You see, thinking is not the problem. It's relating to the concepts that are in thinking as though they are real, when what they are doing is causing a limitation. Now, in the course of conversation, I have to say, oh, we can say, this is a man, that is a man, right? We can say that. Again, that if somehow I can stop thinking about you, if I can say you are that, you are this man, you are this age, you are from this country, then I don't have to think about you anymore. I don't have to ask the deeper question of how is this Brahman? How can I realize that this is Brahman, that is Brahman, that is Brahman, that this is truth? You see? That this is the recognized sage in this moment. No matter what it is that this relationship is presenting at this moment. This is the deeper question. But we limit that question by saying, oh, you have this name, you have this sex, you have this gender, you have this age, you have, now I cannot think about that anymore. I can go on to the next object and I can name that and say, this is this and that's her and she's from that, I can go on to the next object and it's all very entertaining. Yeah. But it also isn't true. It's just to live out of the conceptual mind.
And the conditioning of the mind.
And the conceptual mind is definitely limited by conditioning and wants to support itself in a conditioned way. It thinks it's easier. But what's not recognized is that the more that you think you live your life out of conceptualized thinking, the more you have to maintain the concept of who you are. You are not free of it. You have to find ways to identify in the same way that you name and identify all the objects around you in order to make yourself feel safe or like you know something. You have to do that with yourself as well. So now you have to define yourself in some way. You say, I have these habits, this way of thinking. I like these foods. I don't like that food. I want to live in this place and not in that place. I want to go here. I want to do that. I want to be with this person and not with that person. So you just keep defining yourself in this way in order to try to make yourself feel comfortable. But then after a while, you come to realize this is a huge weight that you're carrying, that it takes a huge amount of effort to sustain this image, which you not only are sustaining for yourself, but now you have to try to push out there for everybody else and try to get everybody else to believe that you are this same person that you're trying to get yourself to in alignment with. And then anything that doesn't fit into that self picture, that self concept, either gets buried through suppression or gets ignored. And then of course it comes back to bite you later. Yeah, because it's there, it's part of who you are and you aren't willing to accept it. So it creates a greater ruckus later on in order to get your attention.
Yeah. And though it's seen as such a huge burden, it's still quite difficult to see being without it.
Yes.
Like it's
yes. And yet this is
even
where
at this
freedom
stage,
lies. When you are no one, when you are nothing, when you have nothing to defend, then you are just here. You're just here. It's not you're here, it's just here-ness is here, right?
this willingness needs to be there to drop that.
Yes,
this
which is
mind.
why I said last time or the time before that, what is it that you cannot drop? What is it that you cannot let go of? It's that which stops you.
But then how much willingness is there in, how much do you will that? Who is it the one that wants that?
Well, there doesn't need to be any willingness, because if that thought occurs to you, is that occurring to the you, or is it coming from your deeper wisdom? You see, if the thought comes that you can just let go, that you don't have anything to protect or anything to defend, and you accept that as deep wisdom, coming from wisdom heart, prajna, if this is prajna of being, and you know this right away, you know this intuitively, oh, that's correct. Now it's not a question of will, it's just a question of what's true. Somehow you know it's true. Now, I agree with you. The mind may jump in sometime later and start to argue with that in order to try to maintain its supremacy. But truth is truth. Once you know truth, if you know it even for a moment about any aspect of your experience, once you know the deep wisdom truth of any aspect of your experience, that's never forgotten. No matter how many times the mind challenges it, it simply isn't. That's the deep nature of truth, of prajna, of wisdom. Yeah. It's that deep wisdom that always brings us back to this here now, brings us back to the cushion, brings us back to satsang, brings us back to the nature of inquiry. Once we've heard this, for most of us, even though we find it very difficult to ask this question, who am I and what is this life about? Once we've heard that this is an option, it's very difficult for us to stop and go back to some other way of being that demands that we support this illusion in some way.
Yes. Right.
We lose the ability to do that. Whether it takes a day or it takes 10 years, we lose that ability. So it's really not a matter of will, but we can say, maybe to fill out what your pointer is, to say we can become more willing not to exert will, but to accept deep wisdom, to know it when we see it. Right? Which is why we come to satsang, right? Which is why we read something in a book, we meet someone, they say something to us, and that sense of deep wisdom is there.
To remind
and
us.
we know it right away. Yeah. We recognize it right away. But that's because we've come to this habit of acceptance, of we aren't really accepting anything, right? But the counteraction to needing to will something to happen is the recognition that we can simply open and accept what's being offered to us. Now there's no will involved, so we're not again not supporting that sense of me that's willing something. There still is a sense, there is a me that's accepting something, but again, when we forcefully will something, we support it, we reinforce it. When we open and accept something, we're dissolving that sense of me-ness.
Beautiful. Thank you.